holding a tablet that was written and being able to read.
New AI ability, that AI has the ability to translate some of these ancient languages.
It sat in silence for over a century, a cracked clay tablet pulled from the sands of ancient Babylon, dismissed as little more than a relic. But when AI finally decoded it, experts were left stunned and unsettled. This wasn't a myth or a royal decree. It was something far more advanced, something that challenged the foundations of history itself.
We've come now to talking about one of our favorite tablets from the ancient world, Plimpton 322, and we have a fairly dramatic new interpretation of what this tablet actually is.
Could a civilization from nearly 4,000 years ago have mastered mathematics more precise than ours today? Tonight, we uncover the chilling truth hidden inside Plimpton 322 and why it changes everything we thought we knew. The day the numbers spoke. In the early 1900s, deep in the heat and dust of southern Iraq, an American archaeologist named Edgar J. Banks was sifting through the ruins of ancient Babylonian cities. Banks wasn't just any archaeologist, he was a man of many trades: antiquities dealer, adventurer, and diplomat. His exploits would later inspire the fictional character Indiana Jones. But on that particular expedition, he stumbled upon something that didn't look like much at all. A small, broken slab of baked clay, covered in tiny wedge-shaped markings known as cuneiform, roughly the size of a modern paperback book, chipped at the corners, and with no illustrations or ornate carvings. It was hardly the kind of treasure that turned heads. Banks had no idea that in his hands was a mathematical time capsule nearly 3,700 years old. He sold the piece to George Arthur Plimpton, a wealthy collector and educational publisher, for just a few dollars. Plimpton would later donate it to Columbia University, where it joined a larger collection of historical artifacts. It was given the name Plimpton 322, a dry catalog label that revealed nothing of its potential significance. And there it sat, quietly, for decades. To most scholars who glanced at it, the tablet appeared to be just another example of Babylonian record-keeping. Perhaps a list of rations, trade goods, or temple offerings. The cuneiform rows, arranged in 4 neat columns and 15 lines, looked too orderly to be random. But without context, they meant little. Throughout the 20th century, a handful of historians and mathematicians took an interest in the strange tablet. In the 1940s, a few noticed something unusual. The numbers seemed to follow a mathematical pattern, hinting at right-angled triangles. But with whole sections of the tablet missing due to erosion, the full picture never came into focus. The artifact remained an oddity, clearly mathematical, but stubbornly silent on its purpose. For the better part of a century, it collected dust, fascinating to a select few specialists, irrelevant to everyone else. That changed when modern technology entered the picture. In Australia, mathematician Daniel Mansfield was designing a curriculum for high school math teachers when he happened across a photograph of Plimpton 322. Something about it wouldn't let go of his curiosity. The layout, the structure, the symmetry in the numbers. Mansfield suspected the tablet was doing something far more advanced than anyone had given it credit for. But to unlock its secrets, he would need more than human intuition. Teaming up with colleague Norman Wildberger at the University of New South Wales, Mansfield turned to artificial intelligence. By feeding the tablet's known sections into machine learning algorithms trained on ancient Babylonian mathematics and cuneiform script, they aimed to reconstruct the missing data. The AI analyzed other tablets from the same era, comparing notation styles, numerical systems, and known patterns in Babylonian problem-solving. Piece by piece, the software began filling in the gaps, offering plausible reconstructions of the damaged rows and columns. What emerged from that digital restoration shocked even seasoned researchers. The pattern was not just mathematical, it was precise, deliberate, and consistent. It suggested a system of knowledge that was not only ahead of its time, but startlingly complete. The reconstructed table didn't look like a random assortment of numbers. It looked like a tool, a guide for something far more complex than record-keeping. And that's when the weight of the discovery began to sink in. This wasn't just a fragment of ancient mathematics. It was a glimpse into a way of thinking that could rewrite the origins of some of humanity's most important scientific ideas. But what the algorithms revealed wasn't just impressive, it was so precise. Some experts began to question whether history had to be rewritten from the ground up. Trigonometry, before the Greeks. For decades, school books have credited the Greeks with inventing trigonometry. We've been taught that Pythagoras, born around 570 BC, was the first to describe the relationship between the sides of a right triangle. But the numbers on Plimpton 322 suggest something staggering. Over 1,000 years before Pythagoras ever lived, the Babylonians had already mastered a concept that looked a lot like his theorem, and maybe something even more refined. When researchers examined the completed AI reconstruction of Plimpton 322, they noticed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. The sets of numbers on the tablet weren't arbitrary. They were what modern mathematicians call Pythagorean triples. These are sets of 3 whole numbers that perfectly satisfy the equation. The square of the hypotenuse equals the sum of the squares of the other 2 sides. In today's classrooms, that's written as A2 plus B2 equal to C2. On Plimpton 322, it was etched in cuneiform in the Babylonians' base 60 numbering system and arranged with deliberate precision. This wasn't one accidental triple, it was row after row of them, sorted in a logical sequence. The significance was hard to overstate. If these numbers were truly intentional, it meant the Babylonians understood right triangles centuries before the Greeks formalized the idea. But that wasn't even the most surprising part. When Daniel Mansfield and Norman Wildberger analyzed the ratios represented by these numbers, they realized the Babylonians weren't thinking in terms of angles at all. Instead of measuring the degree of a slope, they measured the exact proportion between sides. This was a fundamentally different approach to trigonometry, one without sines, cosines, or tangents. Modern trigonometry, inherited from Greek methods, often involves approximations, especially when dealing with irrational numbers. The Babylonian method, by contrast, worked entirely in exact ratios. In practical terms, this meant they could calculate with perfect accuracy using only whole numbers in their base 60 system. No rounding errors, no approximations, just pure mathematical precision. It was an approach that, in some cases, may have been more powerful than the trigonometry we use today. Imagine you're an ancient surveyor tasked with planning the dimensions of a temple or canal. Instead of measuring angles, which can be difficult and imprecise without specialized tools, you work with ratios. If you know one side of a triangle and its proportional relationship to another, you can scale that triangle to any size without losing accuracy. No complex conversions, no guesswork. This method would have been invaluable for architecture, engineering, and surveying. Builders could create perfectly square corners, align massive structures, and calculate slopes for irrigation systems, all without ever measuring a degree. And because the system avoided approximations, its accuracy could rival or even surpass that of certain modern methods when done correctly. The implications were enormous. If Plimpton 322 really was a trigonometric table based on ratios, then the Babylonians were not only doing advanced mathematics, they were doing it in a way that was uniquely their own, optimized for practical use in their world. They didn't just stumble into the Pythagorean relationship, they had harnessed it into a working tool. And that raised a new and pressing question. Advanced mathematics like this doesn't emerge in isolation. It's developed for a purpose, to solve real-world problems, which leads us to the next mystery. If the Babylonians were already this advanced mathematically, then where and how did they use this knowledge? The blueprint, hidden in clay. Plimpton 322 might have been the spark, but it wasn't the only clue. Another tablet, discovered in Iraq and dating to roughly the same era, added a startling new dimension to the story. Known as SI 427, this 3,700-year-old clay tablet wasn't filled with long columns of numbers. Instead, it contained something that looked immediately familiar to modern eyes: a diagram. Lines, measurements, and annotations covered its surface. It was, in essence, a surveying map. SI 427 wasn't found in a temple or archive. It surfaced in the context of a legal dispute over farmland. This wasn't an academic exercise or a work of art. It was a practical document used to resolve an argument about who owned which piece of land. In other words, it was mathematics put to work in one of the most human contexts possible: property rights. When researchers studied SI 427 in detail, they noticed something remarkable. The diagram wasn't a rough sketch. It showed right angles, proportional measurements, and an evident understanding of geometric relationships. Whoever created this map had to know exactly how to measure and divide land accurately. That kind of precision doesn't happen without a system, and Plimpton 322 may have been that system. Think of Plimpton 322 as the formula book and SI 427 as the field notes. One contained the exact mathematical relationships needed to construct perfect right triangles. The other showed those triangles applied directly to the real world, mapping boundaries, defining corners, and ensuring fairness in legal disputes. Daniel Mansfield, one of the researchers behind the AI decoding of Plimpton 322, has argued that this connection is too strong to be coincidence. Plimpton could very well have been the reference tool a surveyor carried in their mind, or even physically, when working on cases like the one represented by SI 427. This changes the perception of Babylonian mathematics in a fundamental way. It wasn't just for scribal training or temple calculations. It was a tool of law and governance. With accurate surveying methods, authorities could formalize property ownership, settle disputes with objective measurements, and maintain records that carried legal weight. Land wasn't just measured, it was controlled, parceled, and protected through math. And here's where it turns unsettling. If mathematics was used not only for building temples and canals, but also for regulating society, then it becomes more than a scientific achievement. It becomes a framework of authority. Whoever controlled the knowledge could control the boundaries of fields, the location of roads, even the flow of water through irrigation systems. In a civilization where survival depended on access to fertile land and water, the ability to measure and assign those resources was a powerful form of control. What's striking is how modern this feels. Today, we use GPS coordinates and cadastral maps to determine property lines. In ancient Babylon, they were doing something eerily similar, using clay tablets and base 60 mathematics. SI 427 proves that their trigonometry wasn't locked away in theoretical exercises, it was shaping the world they lived in, literally and politically. But as impressive as this is, it opens up a much bigger question. Two tablets, Plimpton 322 and SI 427, hint at a highly advanced mathematical culture. Yet, they are only tiny fragments of what must have once been a much larger body of knowledge. And if these fragments survived purely by chance? But here's the bigger question. If they could build such a system, what else did they know that we've lost? The silent archives of Babylon. For every artifact, like Plimpton 322, that captures the world's attention, there are thousands more that remain silent. Across the globe, in the vaults of museums and the archives of universities, clay tablets sit in drawers and boxes, catalogued, photographed, and then quietly forgotten. Many were excavated decades ago, sometimes more than a century, yet have never been translated. The sheer number is staggering. Tens of thousands of Babylonian tablets, some intact, others broken, all waiting for someone with the right skills to read them. The problem is, those skills are rare. Cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script of the ancient Mesopotamians, is one of the oldest writing systems in the world. It takes years of specialized training to master.
If you see a cuneiform tablet for the first time, you're not likely to identify it as writing, and you certainly wouldn't know which way up it went.
It's a form of time travel. It catapults you back in time.
Even then, deciphering an ancient tablet is a slow, painstaking process. Scholars must recognize hundreds of distinct symbols, account for changes in handwriting style across centuries, and interpret the meaning in its historical context. One researcher might spend weeks or months working through a single artifact. That pace simply can't keep up with the number of untranslated tablets we already have. This is where artificial intelligence has begun to change the game. In recent years, machine learning models have been trained on massive datasets of cuneiform inscriptions, thousands of high-resolution images of tablets from different eras and regions. The results have been remarkable. One recent project achieved 98% accuracy in transcribing ancient Babylonian legal texts, even correctly identifying damaged or partially erased symbols. Another model could reconstruct missing sections based on patterns learned from other inscriptions, filling in gaps that would otherwise leave the meaning incomplete. This kind of capability doesn't just speed up the process, it transforms it. A human scholar might translate a handful of tablets in a year. AI could process hundreds in the same time, scanning archives that have been untouched for generations. It could sort them by topic, date, or region, allowing researchers to zero in on the most promising finds almost instantly. What once might have taken decades could now happen in months. And that's where the haunting thought comes in. If Plimpton 322 was sitting in plain sight at Columbia University for nearly a century before its significance was understood, what else might be hiding in those silent archives? Could there be other trigonometric tables, more complete, more detailed, still waiting to be recognized? Could there be ancient engineering manuals, star charts, or even medical texts that reveal a depth of knowledge we've long assumed didn't exist in that era? The unsettling reality is that our understanding of the ancient world isn't limited only by what has survived. It's also limited by what we've chosen to examine, and how. For generations, scholars have approached history through certain narratives. The Greeks as the fathers of geometry, the Romans as the engineers, the Enlightenment as the dawn of science. Anything that doesn't fit neatly into that storyline risks being overlooked, misinterpreted, or dismissed as coincidence. AI doesn't have those biases. It doesn't care whether a discovery rewrites history. It simply processes the data. And when it starts scanning thousands of untouched tablets, it may uncover patterns and connections that no human has noticed before. Those discoveries might expand our understanding of the ancient world, or they might force us to question everything we think we know about how knowledge develops and survives. And that's where the story turns from fascinating to terrifying. Why this changes everything. History, as it's often taught, is a neat timeline, a steady march of progress from one great civilization to the next. Egypt masters monumental architecture, Greece pioneers philosophy and mathematics, Rome perfects engineering, and centuries later, the Enlightenment ushers in modern science. It's a story with a clear direction, a sense of inevitable advancement, but the discovery of what Plimpton 322 truly represents shatters that comfortable narrative. If the Babylonians were using advanced trigonometry over 1,000 years before the Greeks, then the progression of knowledge wasn't as straightforward as we've been led to believe. It suggests that scientific ideas don't always move forward in a smooth line. Sometimes they leap ahead and then vanish for centuries. In other words, the history of human thought might be less like a ladder and more like a series of peaks and valleys, with lost summits hidden in the mists of time. And that's where the unsettling possibility emerges. What if ancient civilizations reached intellectual heights equal to, or even beyond, what we credit ourselves with today, only to lose that knowledge entirely? Plimpton 322 is a fragment of a larger whole, both literally and metaphorically. It shows us one glimpse of an advanced system, but the rest of that system is gone. Was it destroyed by war? Forgotten in the chaos of political collapse? Or simply left to crumble in the dust when the scribes who understood it passed away? We like to imagine that our modern knowledge base is permanent, that once a discovery is made, it's preserved forever. But history tells a different story. The Library of Alexandria burned. Mayan astronomical texts were destroyed by Spanish conquest. Countless ancient works are lost to rot, neglect, or deliberate erasure. If the Babylonians had a trigonometric system superior in certain ways to our own, and it vanished for millennia, what else might have been lost? Medicine? Engineering techniques? Entire branches of mathematics we haven't yet rediscovered? This isn't just about giving credit where credit is due. It forces us to rethink the meaning of the word ancient. Too often, it's equated with primitive, as though the people of 1800 BC were incapable of deep, abstract, or practical reasoning on par with ours. But the evidence suggests they weren't behind us. They were simply working from a different framework, solving problems with the tools and perspectives available to them. In some areas, they may have been ahead. And here's the humbling truth. If we've only recovered fragments of what they once knew, then our understanding of the past, and by extension our own place in history, is incomplete. AI might help fill in the blanks, but it also confronts us with a disquieting question. How many of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements have been buried, not in the ground, but in the gaps of our own historical record? The Decoded Plimpton 322 doesn't just change the story of mathematics. It changes the story of human potential. It tells us that advanced thinking isn't bound to a specific era or technology level. It can bloom in the most unexpected places and vanish just as quickly. And if a broken clay tablet could shake the foundations of history, just imagine what else is still buried, waiting for us to ask the right questions. If you found this discovery as shocking as we did, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden truths. And check out the video on screen right now for another ancient mystery that might just change the way you see the past.